How does our thinking work? How does our consciousness work? How do we think? When we are thinking, what actually goes through our mind? So our sensory organs, when our sensory organs interact with the objects, then something happens. In other words, when we see, when your eyes see, when your ears listen, when your nose smell, when your tongue tastes, when your body touch, and at the same time, simultaneously, when all the internal organs and the 36 elements of the body interact, what happened? So in other words, when your subjective internal internalities, when your subjective internalities interact with the objective externalities, what happened? So there's interaction. When such interaction happens, given that the universal interactive factors exist, what are the universal interactive factors? We study that in the 100 Dharmas. That's the reason why we spend weeks in studying the 100 Dharmas. When such an interaction happens, there may not be any consciousness. There may be consciousness. It depends on whether you pay attention to it, whether it's been transmitted and interact well with the 6 consciousnesses. So in other words, even if your sensory organs interact with objects, consciousness may not arise. But in a lot of cases, it may arise. For example, when you are eating, and of course your taste consciousness would work, right? Your taste consciousness works because the tongue tastes the whatever flavor you have. But then if you are in a mood of deep depression, you don't know what you are tasting. Your tasting consciousness doesn't exist. And if you are really in deep sadness, you don't know what you're eating. If you're in deep exhilaration, you may not know what you are smelling. When you are not paying attention, you may not know what you are seeing. So in the sensory organs, when it interact with the objects, in order that the appropriate consciousness arise, there must be certain factors. When you're meditating in here, you may not be in here. Your thoughts wander all over the place. You're not here. Your body is here, but your consciousness, your intention of meditation may not be here. You may be at home. Did I turn off the stove this morning when I'm cooking my oatmeal? And did I lock my door? All these thoughts will go not in this, will go back to you were worrying at home. So if you're given other factors come true, and all those factors I already have told you, when you actually pay an attention to it, then what is arising is your consciousness. And there are, of course, how many consciousnesses are there? 8 consciousnesses. So when your sensory organs interact with the objects, what is arising is your consciousness. And what did your consciousness depend on, and how your consciousness interact with the objects, not just the sensory organs. How does that happen? Your consciousness depends on the sensory organs. In other words, if you for a handicapped person who lost his sensory organs of vision, then vision consciousness is gone. You're deaf, you can talk, and then you cannot listen if you're handicapped. So your consciousness highly depends on the functionality of your sensory organs. Why do we have to study all these? Are we involved in the cause of medicine or biology or physiology? The Buddha wants us to know the physiological part of the thinking and the mentality part of the thinking. You really have to know all these in order to solve your suffering, in order to solve all your mental affliction and defilements. So when you're studying Buddhism, it's not just about knowing the superficial ceremonies. You have to get deep into details of the universe, the truth of the universe, not superstition. And your consciousness attached to objects. When you see certain things, when you listen to certain things, you smell, you attach to them. Now, when you attach to them, your eyes, these are your subjective internalities, your sensory organs. And these are your objective externalities. They are objective. You don't blame your external. If you get mad with certain things, if you get mad with the honking of a car itself is not giving you the car itself is not mad. You are mad. Because you're attached to the nuisance of the sound produced by the honking. So the externalities are objective. They don't create any emotion. Don't blame on externalities for having you suffer from mental afflictions. It's you created it yourself in your mind. Some people just blame the externalities. You infuriate me. You said something that you shouldn't have said. You should not appear in that way. I mean, you emotionally attach to externalities that are objectively exist. You subjectively give a feelings to objective externalities. Don't attach to them. And also, your subjective consciousnesses arise. Subjective. How many of these consciousness? Eyes, consciousness, ears, nose, consciousness, tongue, taste, etc., etc. This, in general, is how your consciousness work. Your subjective externalities interact with objective externalities, arising subjective consciousness, and attached to whatever you see, whatever you listen. It works out that way, in simple terms. And then let us remember how many consciousnesses are there. We have the body and mind. We have the five skandhas. Materiality is the material part of it, the matter part. Perception, conception, volition, consciousness is the mentality part, the mind. We can only see the materiality part. We cannot see the mind part. The mind is not an entity. The mind is nowhere to be found. The mind, you cannot see it. But the mind works out, but you cannot see it. And then these, which I already have repeated, but is worth saying it again, your senses attached to environments, externalities, giving rise to consciousness. You have the vision, consciousness, audition, olfaction, taste, tactility, mentality, your mano consciousness, this mano consciousness. And then you have the manas consciousness, these are Sanskrit words, and then you have the alaya consciousness. Those are the 8 consciousnesses that exist in you, exist in everybody. And these are responsible for your rebirth, for all your sufferings, all your mental afflictions. These are responsible for your downfall or for your uprising. Given just as a reminder of the consciousness and how consciousness exists, how do we go ahead studying them? They're so complicated. How do we go about studying these so that we know ourselves and know others, so that we know the relationship of ourselves to others and to the whole world and to all dharmas? What's the approach to study it? We have 9 approaches, according to the Buddha's teaching, to study the consciousness. What are these approaches? The first one is we study the objects. How do we perceive the world? How does the world appear in our perception? The objects, the modes of knowledge. What are the modes of knowledge? How does our consciousness get to know it? In what way do we know it? How do we know our environments? And then the moral nature of the consciousness, from the moral side, whether they are wholesome, unwholesome, neutral. And then realm of its activity. The universe is in 3, assuming we can call it a universe, it's in 3 realms. The Kama Dhatu realm, Rupa Dhatu realm, Arupa Dhatu realm. In simple English, world with desire, world without desire, world without form, in 3 layers, huge layers. And how do our consciousnesses work in all these 3 realms? Because some of the sentient beings in a higher realm, they may not have the nose consciousness, they may not have the eyes consciousness, they don't need them. They don't need nose consciousness. And all the consciousness are structured in a different way. So how do our eyes, ears, nose work in different realms? For example, in a higher level, people call them guardian angels in heavens. They don't need the nose realm. They don't need the taste realm. Because they don't eat the same food as we do. They don't need to eat that kind of food. They don't eat food in such a way that they have to excrete. We eat food in such a way that we have to excrete it as dirt, stinky dirt. They don't. The kind of food they have is different. So that the nose consciousness and their taste consciousness are much different. And they're at a much higher level. They don't need to eat meat, to eat beef, pork chops, you name them. They don't need to eat those kind of things. We, the lower realm, kill animals for food. They don't need to do that in a much higher level. So our different consciousness exists in different level, and their functionalities are different. So we are only one of the species of existence in the universe. They're much higher level existence than us because their karma are different from us. Those with heavy karma goes down, those with lighter karma are up on the higher level. And again, our karma is lighter and better than the karma of people suffer from the hell realm. Our karma is a higher level than the animals realm, the ghost realms. Okay? So, 5 concomitant mental functions. When each consciousness arises, what mental functions go with it? We already spent 6 weeks to study concomitant mental functions. I brought to you the 100 dharmas, which would include concomitant mental functions. In other words, when you see, it's not just the seeing. How does your mind reflect and bring out all these mental functions simultaneously to influence you, to affect you? So when you're seeing something, when you're listening to something, it's not just the seeing and listening. Assuming the seeing and the listening consciousness are the kings, there are a lot of ministers that help these kings to perform wholesome and unwholesome deeds. Plus, whatever latent energy, karmic energy, hidden as seeds in your alive consciousness. So the fact that you are suffering is not just because of this lifetime. It could be because of the latent potential energy brought forward from previous lives. We call that innate karmic energy. In this life is the newborn, the present life energy. There's also the innate one that's brought forward from previous life. That's the reason why some prodigy, they are different. They were born with knowing pianos. They were born with the kind of intelligence that you won't find in an 8-year-old. An 8-year-old could jump to grade 12. At the age of 10, they went to universities. Because they brought that kind of intelligence to this life. So you don't even, because everybody is different. And also, sixth, necessary preconditions. Necessary preconditions, what are the conditions for your consciousness to act, to function? So if you don't have those conditions, your consciousness may not function. 7, how does each consciousness function? 8, how does the Buddhist teaching transform this consciousness into enlightenment, the transformation part of it? Just knowing the problem is not enough. Just knowing the causes of the problem is not enough. You have to design method to solve the problem. The Buddha designed this method for us to transform tainted consciousness into pure enlightenment. These are the methods. It's just like a Harvard study case. When you have a problem, you have to know the causes of the problem. First of all, you have to identify the problems. You don't even know your problems. So you're given a case to study. And some people write the case, pages and pages and examinations, 10 pages of the case. They don't even know what it means. They don't even know what the problems are. So the first one is to identify your problems. That helps you to identify the problems of life. But identifying the problems is not enough. You've got to find out the causes of the problem. These give you the causes of the problem. Knowing the causes of the problem is not enough. You've got a design method pinpointing at those causes and problems and try to change them. Don't just stand there and wait for death. Don't just wait for the doom days to come. Hurry up to get the problems resolved. Hurry up to adopt the Buddha's teaching to transform ignorance into wisdom, into enlightenment, positively. Don't wait. Don't negatively just sit there and wait for death. Or wait for mental afflictions to come up to affect you so that you have jealousy, hatred, depression until finally you come to the end of your life. The number 8 is very important. How to transform it using a method, how to get it done. Number 9, leading sentient beings to enlightenment. The problem is solved. Because you have methods to solve the problem is solved. But the problem is solved is not enough. You've got to help all sentient beings to solve their problems too. So in other words, the Buddhist teaching is not designed just to enlighten yourself. It's to enlighten all sentient beings who are in suffering. That expansion of enlightenment is rightly aimed at elimination of the ego at the same time. Because if you just enlighten yourself, you still have that ego of yourself. But if you mix with the whole one sea of one purity, oneness, you and all sentient beings are oneness. If you are enlightened and all sentient beings are suffering, you're not enlightened yet. You're only enlightened when all sentient beings are enlightened. In other words, if you're the only person living in Sarnacy, the most expensive house, and all these other guys are poor, living in squatter areas, are you comfortable? Yeah, you live in the best mansion, but all these others are living in squatters. You're not comfortable. Your compassion has to be rendered to them so everybody is equal. So that you can find the most equality in the Buddhist teaching. Not only equality superficially, equality as the ultimate enlightenment. Right now, what we are studying is only the first 5 consciousnesses. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the taste, and the body. Remember, we're only studying this 5. The 6, the 7, and 8, haven't touched yet. We're only studying the salesman and the saleslady of our body. Your eyes, your ears, and nose, well, those are the front-end salesmen and salesladies. When you deal with problems, you've got to deal with the simple ones first. And you move slowly to the deeper and deeper areas of studies. So, take for instance, if you have to solve the problems of a company, you don't need necessarily to go directly into the directors. First of all, the directors may not be available for your analysis because they are the directors and the shareholders are those behind, and it's not easy to get accessible to them. If you are an auditor, do you go directly into the board without even looking at how the company is structured, how the company sells? Do you study the product? Do you study the methods of selling those products? Do you study how they sell it, how the office function, how the workers work? You don't go directly into the board of directors and say, hey, give me all the details. They won't listen to you. You have to study the operation of the company first to identify any problems, and then you slowly go into detail. So let's get into the objects. How do we perceive the world? How the world appear in our perception. So we study the first 5 consciousness in relation to the object they perceived. Only the first 5, not the 6, not the 7, not the 8. So how do our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body perceive the world? They perceive the world in 3 ways. The state of the objects, state of solitary impressions, state of transposed substance. Do you know what that means? If I don't explain it to you, you probably don't know what it means. But then, right now, we only study the objects of perception. Nothing else. We're not studying the modes of knowledge yet, which is the second category. We're only studying the world as objects and how we perceive them. All right. So we're going to say, okay, the first 5 consciousness, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, the 3 states of the objects. The world can be perceived in 3 ways by the first 5 consciousnesses. The 3 states. All 3 states are involved in direct perception of the senses. In other words, these are the veridical perception, the factual perception. The first state, the state of real objects. The absolute reality as it is seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched here and now. This state is direct veridical perception only, devoid of discrimination, no distinction-making ability, and see the world as representation only. Since it is always exactly the same, it is the suchness of all. When the object first being sensed, no distinction-making process occurs. But when the second thought continues to interact with the 6th consciousness, distinction-making process occurs, and it is not considered as the undiscriminated reality anymore. Do you know what it means? Some people may not know what it means. But let's resolve it. The eyes, the ears, the nose, only see them as they appear to be. When you see this, without making the distinction as what it is, you have that image in you, the impression in you. Not yet the discrimination. So if I see a man walking into the room, my eyes see a man. But I don't know whether he's John, whether he's female or male. There's no distinction, no discrimination, no judgment yet. Just the perception of the impression, of the image. The judgment of it, the analysis of it, the idea of it, the bias of it belongs to the 6th sense. So the salesman only sells. He doesn't make any discrimination. He only sells. He only absorbs. So the eyes, the ears, the nose, and all these, they only absorb the image and the impressions. Nothing else. If your eyes and noses see things as they are, and there's no more discrimination, no more bias, then it's suchness. In other words, you're getting to enlightenment. So in other words, when you see things as they are, and don't pass any judgment into them, no bias, no judgment, no personal view. You won't say somebody shows up and say, he's lazy. He shouldn't belong to our group. He should exclude him out. you're passing judgment on that person. That already belong to the sixth sense, which is the troublemaker. But if you see John, say that if I see someone, I categorize it as someone I don't like. I'm a racist. That person belongs to that group that I'm a racist, that I don't like. When he comes in, I already passed the judgment, is get out. But if I don't, he comes in, I only see him as an impression and image that he is a man. I don't pass judgment on him. You're already one step to enlightenment, because you don't look at that man with tainted glasses. You don't pass judgment. You don't have no bias. You don't have jealousy. You don't have hatred. You don't have rage. You don't discriminate. So our eyes, our ears, and nose see objects as they are and get impressions. Now this is one state that our consciousness perceives. Things as they are. And no judgment, no bias. That is one way of looking at things. That's one way that objects appear to us. What is the second? The second is the state of distorted objects. What is seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched are real, but because we impose an imaginary existence upon experience of them, we come up with distorted images. The next state is we look at them as a factual thing, but we pass the wrong judgment on the images. For example, seeing an old hunchback man at night in a forest from a distance and thinks that he is a ghost, since our mental constructs do not match reality, it is a distortion of reality, but it still contains a grain of reality, so it is called distorted reality. Do you know what it means? So in other words, there's still a grain of truth that it is reality, but I pass a distorted image onto it. When I see a man in there, I said, no, that's a gorilla. Gorilla, it's an animal. But it's a man. But because it's a man, you distort what you see. It's a distortion of image. That is called a state of distorted objects. There's another way our consciousness sees things. You know how dangerous your perception is? You could have distorted what you see. You could have distorted what you heard. Somebody said you're a fool, and then you get mad, but actually he didn't mean that. You just distort his words, and you get mad. So many times you distort the input of information, and because of that you act with suffering, you act with hatred, you act with jealousy. Third, the imagery state of subject-object discriminations. This state is not of reality, it is just imaginary or illusion. This state accepts the validity of the illusory object, that happiness depends on having a new car, that the desert mirage is an oasis, that my imaginary prediction is correct. Also, this imaginary state may become true, false, so it is indeterminate. The second state is, of course, wrong, because it's distorted. The third is you create an illusion in your mind. You're meditating in here, your mind creates a lot of illusions. No real object that you see. So you don't distort on the objects, because there's no real object, but you create illusions in your mind. The illusions, for example, happiness is having fame and reputation and money, and happiness is attached to a lot of material aspects of life. You create an imaginary discrimination in your mind. And you're driving in a highway, and because of the changes in atmospheric, of the water and the air, you see some mirages in there. You think it's an oasis. You think you see water, but there's no water in there. It's just a reflection of the light and water to form water in front of you. It's an illusion, and most of the time our life believe in illusions. believe in delusions. That's the problem. That's how we see things. With these things with imagination, with delusion, with distorted ideas, with discriminations. The second state and the third state creates a lot of problems. And it takes a major part of our thinking. So let me ask you this question before I finish. The first 5 consciousness, how do these first 5 consciousness see things? Do they see things in the number 1 state, or number 2 state, or number 3 state? Number 1, because your eyes only absorb reality. They don't make decisions. Can your eyes itself make decisions? No. Can your ears make decisions? No. Your tongue by itself tastes bitterness, sour, vinegar? No. So don't blame your outer salesman for the wrongs that you have done. And it's something inside that creates the problem. Don't look at things superficially. So we say, okay, the first 5 consciousnesses, the state of their perception is the first one. The state of what? Of real objects. Real objects. They only see real objects. Knowing this, how does it help us in our practice, in our improvement of personalities? We see things not in a real way. We distort information. We create illusions. We get mad because we have illusions. We have depressions because we think that everybody, when they see me as someone who has no value. They see me as someone who is hopeless. That's how I distort how people see me. So if you are not dressed properly, if you don't have any confidence in your own look, then whoever look at you will say, I'm ugly, I'm no good. That's the way they perceive me. You pass your judgment on somebody else's judgment, and you'll believe in it. And that's your habitual thinking. Habitually, you have been doing that. You distort information. You create your illusions. In your whole life. That's why we go to rebirth, reincarnation. All right, so I've just finished the first one. All these 8 consciousnesses perceive these 3 states. They either perceive the state of real objects, or they perceive the state of distorted objects, and perceive the state of imaginary state of subject and object discriminations. They create these states. They create them and they believe in them. And let me tell you before I go, that even real is not real. Even the first state, you say, oh, the first state is the most real, because a lamb is a lamb, a computer is a computer, and it lasts. Even this computer, by its superficial reality, is false. It's just a conglomeration of factors to make it a computer. It's not what it is. It is just all these elements put together to make it happen. You see me as a body, but this body is empty. This body is living on conditions. So this body, even your eyes believe it is real, it is still not real. So even the first state is not real. That's what the Buddha is pointing out to us. Even the real is not real. Not to say your distorted information, your delusion, your illusions. Nothing is real. It's only in your mind. It's only in your mind. Your mind creates it. So you got to study your own mind. How can you get enlightened if you don't even know how yourself can think?